Red Glass, Chapter 11, Explosions. I woke before dawn the next morning, first jarred by the sound of a firecracker, and then a moment later by Dika screaming. She was out of bed, holding Pablo, then leaning over me, grabbing me, pulling my arm, sobbing and ranting in another language. I struggled to make my mind work, my mouth move. Another explosion of fireworks. Dika ran to the doorframe of the bathroom. She crouched down, one hand clutched in a fist in her lap, the other shaking, its fingertips digging into Pablo's arms. "Sophie!" Her voice was high, frantic, and she gestured for me to come. "Dika, it's okay. It's just..." I stood up to turn on the light to try to snap her out of this. With the light on, I saw it. Blood dripping down her bare arm, turning Pablo's white t-shirt red. I knelt beside her and pried open her fist, which was soaked with blood. Inside her hand was the piece of red glass. She had been squeezing it tightly, the way a baby clutches a finger. So tightly, it gashed open her palm. Her eyes were wide, two terrifying circles. I put my arm around her shoulders. Her whole body shook. "Dika, you're okay," I said. "I'm here. It's okay." And then our eyes connected, and it was as though she'd come back into her body. Her expression now was pure confusion. "The bombs? The guns? What happened, Sophie?" "It was just fireworks, Dika." Mr. Lorenzo was at the door, banging on the metal. "Dika! Dika!" I opened the door with bloody hands. He ran to her and sank beside her on the floor and held her. He rocked her and held her bloody hand and spoke to her in Spanish, murmuring like a father to a child, "Shh, tranquila, tranquila." In the bathroom, I wet a washcloth and wiped the blood off her hands. I examined her palm. There were 3 jagged cuts, but they looked shallow, with the blood slowly oozing. I wrapped a clean towel around her hand. Meanwhile, Mr. Lorenzo was holding her, pressing her face to his flannel shirt, murmuring, stroking her shoulder. She'd loosened her grip on Pablo enough that he squirmed away. He had tears too, silently flowing. I sat with him on the bed and rocked him the way Mr. Lorenzo was rocking Dika and whispered to him in Spanish. "Just fireworks, Principito," I said, "for the town fair. They just scared Dika, that's all. Just fireworks." Once Pablo stopped crying, I took off his white shirt, wiped Dika's blood away, and put a clean blue sweatshirt over his head. Angel appeared in the doorway in loose basketball shorts and a t-shirt and his black leather coat that skimmed his ankles like a robe. "Dad? Sophie?" I led Pablo to the door and on our way out took Angel's hand. "Let's go, Angel." We went out into the cool air of the courtyard. I was wearing my white nightgown, the same one Angel had seen me in that morning when I'd had chicken feathers in my hair. "It's okay," I whispered to him, trying to convince myself as much as him. "She's upset, not badly hurt. Your dad will take care of her." "What happened?" "They bombed her house in the war. She must have thought the fireworks were bombs." Once, she'd showed me a picture of what her house used to look like. It was old and big, 3 stories high with stained glass windows. The backyard was shaded with trees and bushes, and in the sunny spots, flowers and grapevines. In the picture, she was sitting at a picnic table full of people laughing and raising their glasses in a toast. "One day we eat and drink together," she had said. "Next day they steal things, kill families, burn houses. Everything kaput." Her house is gone now, Angel. Goosebumps sprang up on my arms. It was barely dawn, half light, before things completely took on their daytime shapes, their clear boundaries, when hidden layers lay exposed. Angel said, "She's an amazing lady, isn't she? To be able to leave everything behind and start a new life." "You and your dad did," I said. I remembered what he'd said the night before about his father's scars. "I don't know." He looked at the ground at a line of ants. "Maybe my dad did." Pablo squatted by the ants, following their path around the patio to the base of a flowering tree. "Why did the soldiers hurt your dad?" I asked. "What happened to your mom?" He shook his head. "Tell me, Angel." "Sophie, you don't want to know these things." I looked down at spots of Dika's dried blood on my knuckles. For once, I wasn't worried about AIDS or hepatitis B or C. Fretting about germs multiplying on a toothbrush seemed ridiculous compared to what Dika or Mr. Lorenzo had been through. "I do want to know, Angel." He took off his coat and put it around my shoulders. "Here, you're cold." The leather was lined with a soft fabric that held a hint of his smell. Pablo slipped inside the coat and leaned his head against my waist. Angel had left his sunglasses in his room. Through the dim blue air, I could see his eyes. They were shinier than most people's eyes, and I couldn't tell if it was because of held-back tears or if they were naturally that way. After we'd been sitting together in silence, I noticed the sound of trucks idling outside on the street and voices. There was more commotion than you'd expect for 6 a.m. We peered outside the iron gate. Dozens of people knelt all the way up and down the street, pouring buckets of colored powder over stencils on the pavement. Very carefully, they sifted patterns through cardboard cutouts. Then they lifted the stencils to reveal perfect flowers and moons and stars and virgins and crosses and hearts and birds. They worked intently and quickly. Back in Tucson, one of Mom's artist friends had a painting of women in a tower, hard at work weaving the world into existence. Now, waking up before dawn, I had the feeling we'd caught them in the act. A girl my age, covered with green and purple powder, spotted us watching and nodded. "Buenos dias." "Buenos dias, señorita," Angel said. "Excuse me, what is it you're doing?" "Decorating the streets with colored sawdust." "Why?" "For the parade." Pablo wanted to watch, so we dragged 2 plastic lawn chairs from the patio to the sidewall and watched the pictures take form and color as the air grew warmer and the light changed from purple to lemony white. Pablo fell asleep in my lap, and when his weight made my leg numb, I moved him to Angel's lap. Angel closed his eyes and pressed his nose to Pablo's hair and breathed in the little boy's smell. I smiled at the sight, as if we were married and Pablo was our son. Imagining this made my chest tingly at first and then achy. Another firework sounded, and I jumped and hoped Mr. Lorenzo was holding Dika tight. "You think they'll get married, Angel?" I asked. "My dad's crazy about Dika." He opened his mouth to say something else and then closed it. "What?" "Nothing, just," he paused. "I want her to be happy." I nodded. A few weeks ago, I would have asked why on earth anyone would marry Dika without a gun at their head. But now I wondered if her zaniness was a veneer for something tender and real. It reminded me of our door frames, which used to be painted in a 70s palette of pea green and rust orange and dead leaf brown, until Juan scraped the paint off. Underneath was solid maple that he sanded and polished until it was so pretty and smooth I couldn't resist running my hand over it whenever I walked through. In the weeks before our trip, Mr. Lorenzo would sometimes walk with Dika to the Salvation Army. That was her glass collecting time. One day, out of curiosity, I followed them. All business, Dika tromped down the streets carrying a plastic grocery bag. Mr. Lorenzo walked beside her in his flannel shirt. When Dika spotted a good piece, she bent down like an aging geologist and held it to the light, examining it and offering it to Mr. Lorenzo. He admired the glass too, and sometimes ventured to pick up a piece himself. Once he found a red piece and spent about 5 straight minutes looking through it, tilting it this way and that, his eye only millimeters from the glass. Then he put down the glass and looked at her. I studied her too and saw a large 60-year-old body with tan cellulite and orangish blonde hair with an inch of gray-black roots showing. But the look on Mr. Lorenzo's face said he saw something else, a goddess saturated with colored light. We watched the artist's slow progress down the street. Right in front of our hotel, they'd made a dove inside a circle of flowers. Now, farther down the street, they were making a picture of the Virgin of Guadalupe and her starry cape on a sliver of moon. The sun was peeking behind a building now, illuminating the walls across the street, each painted different colors: deep red, mustard yellow, lavender, candy pink. Next to the rainbows of sawdust painting, so many colors were almost dizzying. After Dika's house was bombed, she stayed for a little while in the rubble. Minutes or hours or days, I couldn't tell, because she was crying as she spoke, and it didn't seem right to ask questions. She shuffled and sorted through the debris, picking out pieces of green crystal wine glasses, sharp bits of vases, amber and violet, crushed wings of a blue glass angel. Some of the glass was smooth, melted in the heat of the explosions, some jagged. Finally, she picked out one shard of red glass and put it in her pocket. When I asked Dika why they bombed her house and why they put her in prison, she said, "No reason, no reason, only the hate." Juan explained what he'd gathered from the asylum papers and what he'd read about the war. Serbian soldiers had rounded up Bosnian Muslims to kill her in prison. Dika didn't practice the religion, but that didn't matter. The Serbian soldiers bombed her house, found Dika in the ruins, and sent her to a prisoner's work camp. After her release, she got political asylum in Germany and worked in a factory there until her visa expired. That's when she called us. Until then, I'd never known she existed.